Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're exploring the next evolutionary step in wound care. We are joined by Michele Smith from NanoTess, a Calgary-based company revolutionizing how we treat everything from simple skin tears to severe chronic wounds. Their groundbreaking product, NanoSALV Catalytic, isn't just another cleanser or standard dressing, it's a brand new treatment category. By leveraging catalytic therapy, NanoSALV acts as an air traffic controller for your cells, kickstarting the body's natural healing process, modulating inflammation, and providing antimicrobial benefits, all without the active ingredients getting used up. From its remarkable success in an Alberta Health Services pilot helping vulnerable populations, to making advanced wound care accessible in local pharmacies across Canada, NanoTess is truly changing the game. Stay tuned as we dive into the science, the stories, and the future of healing with Michele Smith.
All right, good morning, Michele. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us.
We've been following along with NanoTess and the journey for many years now, so it'll be amazing to get the update, see how things are doing.
It certainly is a rapidly developing little company that is growing and helping people in a lot of different ways than it wasn't a couple of years ago. So really focusing in on how can we help access with skin and wound care and reduce some barriers to accessing skin and wound care.
And so what made you get into the field of skin and wound care then? You previously were working as a paramedic and then doing the behind the scenes administrative with Alberta Health. What brought you to NanoTess?
I was so fortunate. The stars really did align in a lot of ways. When NanoTest was exploring how it could be used in larger health systems, they were very fortunate to be able to partner with Alberta Health Services. And they did that through their innovation team and research team. And that innovation and research team was looking for a group of mobile community care teams that would be able to trial and use NanoSALV Catalytic in more community-based environments, providing essentially outreach style of care. And through that, our team was selected. Our team was the Alberta Health Services, Emergency Health Services, Mobile Integrated Healthcare Team, which consisted of community paramedics that were working across all zones across Alberta. Our trial was studied and focused in Calgary, where we picked a single community paramedic unit called the City Centre Team, who their entire focus is to support people who are insecurely housed or experience homelessness, suffering through different chronic conditions and situations, and we're having to access healthcare services outside of what we would consider the traditional primary care or emergency care routes. And our city center team saw patients in encampments. They saw people at bus stops and the corners of streets. They met people at warming shelters. They hosted some pop-up clinics to really try and bring care to people where that they were at, and at the time that they were ready to access care. So if you can imagine, they were seeing people in really austere situations. At the time, our wound care kits and our supplies were exploding out of our bags. It was just overwhelmed at the time. So we had many tools that we could reach for, maybe not necessarily using them all as effectively as we could. And we had many patients to care for that were facing a bunch of different situations, whether it was temperature and climate, environment situations, straight through to just struggling with everyday concerns that they needed to have addressed. So as part of that study, we got to partner with NanoTess and the innovation team to be able to see where could we test NanoSALV and its use? What benefits does that offer to our patients? And is there any improved outcome for the patients and the clients that we were serving? And then interestingly enough, what benefits were there for the members of the community paramedic team that were able to start using NanoSALV as a tool shortly after?
Very cool. So I want to get into like how the pilot went there and actually rolling it out into the community. But just for anyone who's not actually familiar with NanoTess or the NanoSALV Catalytic, can you fill us in a little bit on what the actual product is and maybe a little about how it works in wound care?
Yeah, so NanoTest is a company that is building and producing and manufacturing catalytic healing treatment matrices called NanoSALV Catalytic. NanoSALV Catalytic is manufactured here in Calgary, Alberta. Our head office is here in Calgary, and all of our distribution happens here as well. When you think about NanoSALV Catalytic, you're probably wondering a little bit about what is a catalyst? What does catalytic mean? How is this different? What is it? And how could I apply it? And those are all really, really great questions. So right now, our entire team is focused on how do we create awareness? How do we promote education and help people understand how catalytic therapy and our catalytic treatment matrix is really different from the products that they know and love and are using regularly every day. So I can tell you, NanoSALV Catalytic is not a cleanser. It is also not really a dressing. We have introduced a brand new treatment category called biochemical modifiers, being catalytic therapy, to skin and wound care. Catalytic therapy leverages the power of catalysts, which if you think back to your high school chemistry classes, a catalyst is something that helps reactions happen better and faster without themselves actually being used up. And that's what differentiates us from a lot of other wound care products that are available currently on the market. If you go back to basically Wound Care 101, depending on what kind of training you got, maybe your level of experience giving and providing wound care, whether that's as a clinician or even as a caregiver, a family member, a friend, you may not really realize how complex healing actually is. Healing itself is a very complex, coordinated set of events that needs to happen. In fact, it involves hundreds of interacting signals and active molecules and biofactors that have to align precisely at the right time, at the right place, in the right environment, with the right bits and pieces there to actually help those reactions happen. So when you introduce a catalyst to that, you have the benefit of a bit of an air traffic controller almost. You get a tool in there that's going to be able to help all of those very complex healing reactions while also amplifying their benefits. And using NanoSALV Catalytic lets you not only optimize and promote that healing, but you also have the benefit of modulating inflammation. And then lastly, it offers an antimicrobial effect that gives you sort of 3-in-1 benefit, as opposed to a lot of other tools and products on the market that usually have a single purpose. That single purpose sometimes disrupts that healing cascade. You can't move nicely between hemostasis and that inflammatory phase and then into that proliferative phase and hopefully into the remodeling phase. But where NanoSALV Catalytic provides benefit is being able to interact with all of those phases, really trying to address the biggest challenges of those cell-to-cell interactions and those signals and the communication that needs to happen for healing to occur.
This sounds incredible. Like, I'm not that old, but back in my day, all we really had was maybe some silver impregnated gauze, which had its specific uses. And again, just trying to keep bacteria from growing. Maybe some polymyxin, some bacitracin. Most of the educators, when I was going through school, they didn't really speak too highly of using polysporin in wound care. Like, just the amount of allergies and reactions and like negative experiences often apparently outweigh the good of the actual healing that it helped promotes. And so now we've like kind of leapfrogged. Like, this is the next evolutionary step in wound care, is it's actually helping the body heal faster. It's not just inhibiting other things from growing in your wound, but it's actually increasing the speed at which things, like, I'm picturing like Wolverine here from the X-Men, you're just like rapidly growing your wound back.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great point. We often ask ourselves and clinicians, like, the body is fascinating. When you cut the tip of your finger off, why don't we grow a new finger? And why doesn't that finger that grow 2 times the size of the other fingers? So our cell-to-cell communication and the physiology of healing is fascinating. It's fascinating. And our body knows how to have those intrinsic healing mechanisms when it is armed with the right situation, the right environment, the right microbiome, all of those things, and is able to allow those things to happen with the least amount of interruption, like you're saying, as possible. That's when we can see some real great advancement and progression and healing. But I love that you brought up how, technology is really not come as far as we would expect in such a period of time. In many cases, we're using technologies that were effective in World War II, but we're still using those same technologies that we used in World War II. So being able to have some advancement in skin and wound care as another tool in people's toolkit when they're facing very, very challenging situations in many cases, and an increasing number of comorbidities for people every day is a really nice thing. For our team of community paramedics, we don't get hardly much training in skin and wound care. We're focused much more on emergency reactive responses to things. And when you move into the field of community paramedicine, now you get the benefit to slow down a little bit and maybe more comprehensively assess a patient. There for one thing, but able to help them with other things because we don't have the same pressures as our emergency department systems do. And with that, you start to learn a lot more about what are some of those things that are going to affect biochemical stagnation, which is the biggest risk associated with wound care. And for people who maybe aren't familiar with biochemical, it's really that failure or that slowdown of that coordinated set of events and those reactions and signals that need to happen that results in things being impaired or not progressing. So how do we start positioning ourselves to be able to address the risk of or the presence of biochemical stagnation a lot sooner to be able to manage things before they become much more chronic and complex? And that's where catalysts are so great. Not only are they always working when they're in direct contact with the skin or the wound that they're trying to heal, they never ever are getting used up. And then because they're using ingredients and molecules that are part of our intrinsic healing mechanisms already, they align really nicely with what our body is already trying to do, which also makes them non-cytotoxic. They have a very high safety profile and are considered biocompatible. So they are very, very compatible with what we're trying to help with when something as simple as healing ought to look is so easily disrupted.
Are you a healthcare professional ready to take the next step in your career? Do you dream of a role where you truly make a difference in a community that's perfect for you and your family? Well then, let me introduce you to Cherry Health. Our platform puts thousands of healthcare opportunities right at your fingertips. Explore jobs by location, specialty, compensation, and more. All on an intuitive map-based platform, available on Android, iOS, or your computer's internet browser. Create your professional profile for free and get started messaging directly with employers. Beyond the app, Cherry Health also offers personalized, white-glove recruiting services who can guide you every step of the way. Your dream healthcare career is just a click or a phone call away. Visit www.cherry.health to start the next phase of your journey.
What type of wounds are going to be the most affected here? Like, are we talking bed pressure wounds, like diabetic wounds, foot wounds, like edematous lower leg wounds that have been just chronically draining and persisting for months and months? Like, where do you actually apply this? Let's say if we have patients that sound like they'd fit the bill.
Yeah. So great question. When you are considering using NanoSALV Catalytic, you could think about something we call the 3 I's. So anytime a skin cell is damaged or stressed, it technically requires some healing. And in the situation of the 3 I's, we have injured, inflamed, or infected. And all 3 of those I's would be indications for possibly considering NanoSALV as part of the plan for care. When you think about injury, this is often, people's minds often shift more to acute injury. So here's where you have your burns, you have your traumatic injuries like scrapes and lacerations and abrasions. You have blistering from friction and rubbing. Then you can move more into things like surgical incision sites, things along those lines, for more of that acute side of things. But then exactly as you mentioned, unfortunately, not all of those situations heal. And the trajectory takes them to a place where we're increasing in pain and discomfort, lowering quality of life depending on how impacted the person might be. And that's where we're sitting in those really biochemically stagnant situations of diabetic foot ulcers and terrible pressure injuries and some of those venous leg ulcers that you mentioned. So a wide breadth of applicability. And actually the AHS study was very focused in what we would consider those complex chronic wounds. On average, the wounds they studied were present for over a year and a half. They were studied over the course of 4 weeks and monitored and surveilled for 4 weeks. And of course, that person's comorbidity would be the same in those 4 weeks as they would be after they introduced NanoSALV. Best-in-class dressing, standards of care, same comorbidities. And in the first 4 weeks, often what was seen was that the wounds were not progressing. In many ways, they were very much so stalled. The introduction of NanoSALV as an addition to that care plan, continuing with best-in-class dressings and standard of care, saw an increase in percentage area reduction of 56%. So we started very quickly in just 4 weeks to see those wounds begin to heal because that intrinsic healing mechanism had a beautiful kickstart that allowed the body to reset and focus again on what it was trying to do, which is heal.
And sorry, those were wounds that had been existing for months and months and months, and then they were looked at over this 4-week period. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
That is crazy. How do you quantify, let's say I cut my finger or I just had a surgical incision and it's not something expected to be chronic or it hasn't pre-existed for months and months. How do you quantify the benefit of the NanoSALV in a more acute case like that?
So in those situations, I think it kind of depends on what is the goal for care at that point. What is the healing outcome expected to be, and how can we continue to boost it up and build it up so that it's going to hopefully have the path of least resistance to heal. In those situations, what clinical teams are telling us and the feedback that we're receiving from patients is that the scar from the incision site itself is stronger. It's healing much flatter. So the strength of that tissue seems better. The scar itself isn't as prominent as what would have been expected in some cases. And in situations where things are more acute, something as simple as a skin tear. My dad is in his 70s. I feel like you can look at him and he gets a skin tear sometimes. So knowing that he's very active, he plays with my kids all the time, and they get playing and wrestling and having a lot of fun, and he gets skin tears on his arms and his legs really easily. He catches his leg on his bike pedal and, another skin tear just like that. Just by factor of age, healing for him is going to look a lot different than it does for you and I, and it does for my kids too. They still have the benefit of being young to help them heal. So in that case, I work with him and we talk a lot about how NanoSALV prevents those injuries from becoming much worse and gets him back on his bike sooner and gets him back doing the things that he loves a lot sooner with a lot less monitoring and care by him as well. So something that would have, maybe been several weeks to heal is healing much faster for him now.
Is this let's say somebody has a skin tear, somebody has you name it, right? The possibilities are endless. How do they actually go about using the NanoSALV? Can they get it from a store, or does it have to be prescribed and under direct supervision of a doctor, basically?
So NanoSALV and NanoTest moved into this new treatment category with the intention of wanting to make it accessible. They didn't want to have any barriers to care. They wanted NanoSALV to be available from hospital to home so that in very acute or complex and chronic situations where a large care team was caring for a wound, as that transitions through healthy and growth and progression into healing, the patient or the client or the person would be able to continue caring for themselves, hopefully independently. So with that in mind, it is classified by Health Canada as a Class 2 medical device, meaning that it's not a pharmaceutical, which does make it much more accessible for many people. It's available across Canada in pharmacies, And you can work with the pharmacy team at your favorite pharmacy to go in to request that if it's not in inventory, that it be ordered in for them to be able to access for you. By being a medical device also means that it's very accessible as a tool in many different clinical care settings and for many different clinical care teams, because as you mentioned, sometimes having to get that oversight is an extra step that isn't as convenient or as easy as we'd love for it to be so being able to use this like a dressing or another medical device, like a glucometer, for example, is really convenient for healthcare teams. The use of it is meant and designed to be very simple. It's also meant to be used across all 4 stages of healing. So for me, who doesn't have a whole bunch of training in skin and wound care, it simplifies my decision making. I don't have to guess what stage of healing I'm at. I can simply say, I still need to heal, and I'm going to try and help my body do that in the best way possible. So when you apply NanoSALV, there's a couple of really important principles. The first being always in direct contact. So the catalyst can't do its work unless it's in direct contact. And when you apply it, it's a bit counterintuitive because it comes in the form of a gel to make it easy to spread. You want to only put just a paper thin layer. That paper thin layer is going to be all that you need because catalyst on top of catalyst on top of catalyst isn't going to provide any additional benefit. So a nice paper thin layer in direct contact with all of the surface area of the skin or wound that you're trying to heal. And then your goal from there becomes, how am I going to keep the catalyst in place? And then thinking a little bit more holistically, what other measures or factors should I also be addressing? So in the situation, like you mentioned, of having something that's a little bit more exudative, I do still need to pick a secondary dressing that will help with that moisture. The catalyst itself and NanoSALV Catalytic isn't creating any sort of barrier when you apply it. You can think of it as grains of sand suspended in a net. And whatever needs to pass through from the wound up into that secondary dressing absolutely can. So there is no barrier factor at all. But it does always need to be in direct contact and then always with that paper thin layer.
And how often does it need to be applied for maximal effectiveness?
In this situation, you would reapply at any time that the NanoSALV was at risk of being washed, rubbed, or sweated off, or at your next dressing change. So there's no reason to have to increase your dressing change cadence or frequency. But if you're healing something on your face and maybe putting a physical topper dressing isn't something that you want to do, you want to stay a little bit more discreet, you could apply some NanoSALV on your face and then dab a little bit of lotion or ointment over top to help hold the catalyst in place. Or in situations where you're dealing with something like a pressure injury, here, we're going to do dressing changes every 3, 4, maybe even 5 days. So reapply at every dressing change in that case.
Attracting top healthcare talent is crucial for providing exceptional patient care, but connecting with the right professionals can be time-consuming and complex. Cherry Health bridges the gap. Our network allows you to showcase your organization, post jobs with precision and ease, and directly engage with healthcare providers actively searching for roles like yours. Whether you're an ambitious do-it-yourselfer or a seasoned recruiter, our intuitive web platform makes it easy to showcase your open roles and organize your applicants. Need a more personalized approach? Cherry Health Staffing Solutions offers dedicated recruiters to find and vet the perfect candidates for your specific needs. Build your dream team with Cherry Health. Visit www.cherry.health and start growing your team today.
Okay, very cool. And then are there any contraindications to application? Are there any cases where I should definitely not apply it?
So wound and skin care is but a factor of all of our holistic concepts. So we're always going to consider the whole person. And in situations where you are concerned that there are any sort of systemic concerns that need to also be addressed, or any underlying factors that need to be managed or at least educated on, those are things that still need to happen. In no way, shape, or form should NanoSALV replace any of those efforts. So my favorite example is something like a cellulitis. When cellulitis advances, often a systemic antibiotic is required, and that systemic antibiotic is going to try to combat the infection internally as part of those intrinsic mechanisms. But where NanoSALV could provide some benefit is because often the skin at the topical level is feeling inflamed and often irritated, sometimes even sore, you could consider putting a little bit of NanoSALV to help with the topical level of discomfort or the inflammation there, to see if you could have a bit of a sandwich approach or an Oreo cookie kind of approach. So in that case, of course, always addressing the underlying cause and making sure that we're treating the whole patient, not just the immediate concern just in front of our noses.
Okay, so you don't just blindly slap it on for any kind of dermatologic issue. You need to have figured out where the wound came from and make sure there's nothing going to be progressing or worsening. And then otherwise, good to go.
Yeah, and then always continue following your standard of care. If offloading is indicated, offloading still should be recommended and tried to be adhered to. In many, many, many situations, compression is so helpful. So you need to consider using compression as part of that standard of care. You absolutely still need to do that. If there are situations where you need to think about maybe some small adjustments to diet, activity levels, things along those lines, those recommendations and those standards of care should absolutely still be followed.
Okay, and then in the green room, before we started actually chatting here, you mentioned there's like a few other specific indications where it has shown even above average effectiveness, like hidradenitis suppurativa. Was there anything else in that list that people should be aware of where it should be definitely considered?
The other interesting area that we've been working with that's a little bit less common is epidermolysis bullosa. And it's something that is affecting usually our pediatric population. Very uncomfortable, very, very tough for those little ones to be having to manage, and hard for the family and their care team to also have to be able to support them. Some really exciting research being done in both of those areas to support those patients and to be able to give them hopefully another tool to support their care. One of the families that we have been so fortunate to be in contact with was telling me just a couple of weeks ago that their 3-year-old son is going to be able to do a little bit of swimming and play some t-ball this summer because his skin is healed enough for him to be able to do that, at least to give it a try, which will be something brand new for him. Really helping as best as we can to let kids be kids.
That's amazing. Now it must warm your heart when you hear those amazing examples coming through those case studies. Very cool. As far as evidence studies, anything else in terms of what people should know about the effectiveness or safety profile?
I think there are some really great publications coming in the next few months that will really broaden people's understanding. The copper-dependent signaling and using copper and unlocking copper as part of our catalytic technology is something that's really well studied. And so if anybody is curious about how copper plays a part in the biochemical signaling and how it supports healing, being able to find information about that is very simple to be able to do. Or, of course, I would love to connect you to that information if they were curious. But then along those same lines, how can we continue to help the healthcare system as a whole? And I think people don't realize just how costly skin and wound care is in Canada. Our colleagues at Wounds Canada publish a study every year that analyzes the costs of wounds. And this year it was upwards of $13 billion for our healthcare system, which if you do a little bit of analysis on that, that's more costly than the most costly cancers combined in Canada. For how we are currently approaching our skin and wound care. We know that, 1 in 6 families is affected or has someone in their life that is affected by a skin or a wound condition. Knowing that our population is going to be aging very rapidly here by 2030, we'll have our largest, oldest population here in Canada. Being able to support studies and research that's going to support them with that $13 billion challenge that we have at the moment is going to continue to be really, really important. And that's where I think by taking a proactive and sort of preventative approach to that skin tear now so that it doesn't eventually cost $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to the healthcare system when it's a chronic wound later is going to be very, very impactful.
It's nuts how quickly those costs start to balloon, right? Especially as you age, or if you have any kind of like autoimmune compromise or immune compromise, the smallest little cut or wound can become a huge problem.
Huge problem.
How have things been going as far as the adoption this last couple of years? What's the reception by the medical community or just patients directly themselves been like?
I mean, innovation adoption in Canada is a little bit slow. There is this feel that we want to see someone else do it first. So I think in my experience, and even with the implementation for NanoSALV as part of our wound care kits in Alberta, this is where, I quickly learned that innovation in healthcare, it rarely fails because of the science. The scale is where the challenge really comes into play. And when you consider that every team, every region, every clinician, and every patient has a sort of a really unique context, and then you overlay the policies, the procedures, the supply chain, the procurement, the number of different approval levels, things like that, that all have to be considered, you really quickly learn how many mountains there are to climb. And some of those mountains are Everest size. Yeah, so it's quick to become challenging, but it's very humbling at the same time, because if we don't climb those mountains, then we know our patients aren't ever going to benefit. So still many mountains left to climb.
This is the story we hear from many, 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 I would say most, if not all, entrepreneurs in the healthcare space. It's just a very slow moving sector of the world in general. It's not easy to get through the regulations and the skepticism, the hesitancy.
And it's very tricky because we could be healthcare leaders in Canada, and we should be healthcare leaders. There are brilliant people in this country that have many, many wonderful ideas and suggestions. And if we could find a way to trust one another a little bit faster, these innovations could be making a difference much sooner for our loved ones. And when I think about if I was in a situation where I needed some wound care or any care, of course I would want the best care for me right now.
So anybody who's interested in finding out more or actually tracking some down and trying it out, where can they go for some more information?
I would welcome you to reach out to us on our website. We have a portal there that you can get in touch with us anytime, whether your preferred method is by email or by phone call. We're here to share any information and education with you as best we can, and to try and to continue to make NanoSALV Catalytic more accessible across the country. Hopefully someday having a little bit more replication like we do here in Alberta, where there is even some benefit coverage to make it that much easier for people to access skin and wound care.
And what was the website?
NanoTest.com.
Okay, amazing. Well, Michele, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a little bit more about the technology.
Thanks, Jordan. This was great.